Darla.
Hi, Matt. How are you?
Amazing. Pleasure to
I'm
have
loving
you.
that background you have.
Thank you. I started putting my daughter's art on the wall years ago. She's now almost 10, and these are years old. And it just so happened to end up the best possible Zoom background for working from home during
Yes.
COVID. Every single prospect call, because I'm in software sales, ends up having some kind of an opener related to that. So it's been
That's
a
amazing.
blessing that I never anticipated.
Love it.
So first of all, thank you for giving us some of your time. I'd love to just start with a little bit about kind of what you do today.
hmm
And then I'd love to pivot over to the sort of origin story. How did you end up in that line of work?
Yeah. So I have a company called Sourced, and we train transformational leaders. That's our main gig, helping people to deliver transformational work one-on-one as a coach or a healer or a consultant, where maybe they're instead of just giving answers, they're really helping their clients shift their energy. And
Hmm.
then we have a training for retreat leaders to help them deliver similar results in a group format. So that's the main thing that I do. But the way that we do it is through trusting your magic, which is really how your divine guidance is coming through you on behalf of the client and really shifting the consciousness on the planet. So when you invited me to this, I thought we probably have some things we could talk about.
I agree. I very much agree. So most people that I've talked to that are in this field aren't dreaming about becoming a heart-centered magic trainer when they're in their
Yeah.
teen years.
Yeah.
What was it like kind of growing up, and where did you find yourself originally coming out of school, and then how did you end up in the work that you're doing now?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, when you said what you dream about as a kid, I really wanted to be a writer and a journalist. And
Mm.
I was fascinated with people, but I learned from my teachers that that wasn't going to make a lot of money. And I was good at math and science. And I remember the moment where my math teacher said, you should be an engineer. Like, if you can, you should. And then I said, I don't know what that is. And I grew up in a town of 500 in northern Minnesota, and no one in my family went to college. So it was like, I really didn't know. I didn't know what graduate school was. I was already in college and I didn't know what grad school was. So um, he wrote, on the paper, the different types of engineering. And I said, which one's the hardest? And he circled chemical. And then I took the paper straight to my guidance counselor's office and said, this is what I'm going to do. No idea what I was getting myself into. But one of the things he said is it's the fastest way to get a good job and make money. And growing up in a small town, my parents struggled with money, and I just wanted to do something more. I wanted to see what was out there, and I thought that would be my ticket. So I went to school, became a chemical engineer. I got a job at Procter & Gamble out of college, which was coveted, so then I'm there and I'm thinking, okay, I have to be the best and get promoted and do the thing and keep this job. And I got promoted pretty quickly. And I remember having this struggle, because I'm sure we'll talk about intuition and, which I call magic. I remember having this struggle of intuitively knowing things, but then I had to prove it to my boss.
Mm.
And so I worked as an engineer for about 5 years. And luckily I had a mentor who was really intuitive. And I don't know if she did this on purpose or not, but she had figured out how to make the case for her intuition seem really practical. So I got to train under her. But yeah, I remember just thinking, well, I just know it's that, but then I have to run all the tests and all the things and the spreadsheets and the PowerPoints to justify my intuition. But really, it was the perfect career because I didn't trust myself at all. Even though it's like I knew, I could have never said with conviction, I know. Because growing up, so many things that were happening around me, people were pretending weren't happening. And if I would speak about it, they'd be like, oh, we don't talk about that. Or no, that's not how it is. It's really like this. And so even though I was highly intuitive as a kid, like you can look at pictures and kind of get a sense that I could see things. I didn't trust it at all. So it's like the data in the spreadsheets helped me to exist, even though I was fighting with it, the intuition at the same time.
That's very interesting. So when you were finding that intuition, did you find that it came just anytime, all the time? Or did you find that you got it when you were in certain like flow states?
That's a good question. So I'm sure we'll get into, I have an assessment that helps people sort how their magic works. And the strongest one that I always have, I call recognition magic.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like I could see something and have a click or a knowing, like, yes, that's it. Yes, that's it. And I've now studied human design, and, you know, it's a gut like resonance. But it was mainly, and I would say up until, you know, just a handful of years ago, it would show up mainly outside of myself. So if I saw something like for work, I could see it, right? But for myself, just blind.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can deeply relate to that.
Really? Yeah. I mean, because we have an attachment to our identity and how we show up and what we can do and can't do and how we were programmed.
A lot
But
of
for someone
stories
else,
to
we
tell
don't have
ourselves.
that, right?
Yeah. I was actually just talking with my boss earlier today about how sometimes you end up with a curse of intuition because things will come to you so quickly and you're so certain you're right that you start to interact with other people almost in a condescending way, because it's like, don't you see what I see?
Yes.
You know, and you start to get frustrated. And, you know, I don't necessarily think it's a horsepower thing. To your point, I think it's almost a dropping away of that prefrontal cortex and allowing the meaning and map machine that is our gut, that can take in so much more, basically infinite data for all intents and purposes, and come to those conclusions really fast.
Yeah.
But I definitely have found that in my career, I used to have to almost force myself into certain states. Like I would stay up really late, and between like 2 and 3 in the morning, it would be like I'd be this mix of exhausted. Basically, all the parts of me that were distracting me kind of fell away because there's no more effort there, and that it would almost allow me to have those moments of kind of connection. But it's become a lot more natural.
Sounds tiring.
Oh my, Darla, I was on death's door, and not and,
Wow.
and you wouldn't have known it because I was a quote unquote fit person doing mixed martial arts and obstacle course races and all these kinds of things, and you know, eating right and all this kind of stuff. But I was burning the candle at both ends and in the middle. And yeah, that's probably 3 or 4 years ago. I kind of hit my wall. So actually, let's circle back to, okay, so you're now a promoted, successful chemical engineer at Procter and Gamble, and you're both getting the value of being supported by facts, which is helping give courage to you to say, okay, my intuition's right, and probably opening you up a little bit more and more to sort of trusting that guidance. Where does it go from there? Where do you make your exit?
Yeah. I wouldn't even say I was trusting my guidance. I just was frustrated. I was frustrated that I just I have to do these things I don't want to do. But then I didn't really trust enough. You know, I wasn't looking back, I can see I wasn't fully enrolling people in my thought process because I wasn't trusting myself. So anyway, but what happened is, well, first of all, this is fun. So in my review, when I got promoted, my boss, you know, gave me the feedback, they were promoting me. So it was good feedback. And then he said, and this is the part that I remember, your soft skills are great, Darla, but they'll only get you so far here. And you really should focus on getting in the lab and like proving your ability to be techie. And it's like, it was kind of confusing because I'm getting promoted for the skills that I was bringing, like intuition and connection and like bringing rapport to project teams, getting things done. But like tone it down because you'll be limited in this company if you only have those more feminine skills, right? So it stood out to me that, and I believed it, it's like, I didn't believe it, but I believed it. And so some part of me took that on, like, I can't actually make a good living being me. I have to be this other thing. So I'm in that place. And then I got nominated to take this training to be a coach within my company. And so it was very cool, very progressive training. I call it diversity coach. Essentially, we went on 3-week-long retreats where we were looking at our own bias so that we could hold space for people who were working together to help them sort out if their bias was getting in the way of them being effective working
sort of
together.
Like an arbitrator?
Yeah. Yeah. So in order to be able to do that, you had to deal with your own stuff, right? So one of the exercises that was amazing, we sat in a circle and took turns going to the center of the circle. And we'd have to tell our story about our beliefs, about gender or race. And everyone on the outside of the circle would give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down if they thought you were telling the truth.
Interesting.
So you had to really look at what your programming was. And up until that point, the only time I'd ever spoken in front of a group was with a PowerPoint and data. And here I had to like tell the truth about myself in front of a group of colleagues.
Possibly in damning ways.
Yeah. And I was just terrified, like my body breakdown. I got sick. It was a whole thing. But at the same time, it was like one of those light bulb moments where I just thought, why doesn't everybody know this? Why doesn't everybody know? One, we can tell when we're telling the truth. Like you really can tell if we stopped if we all stopped colluding, we can tell when someone's really telling the truth. And why are we not looking at our biases and this was my first kind of foray into limiting beliefs, right? And it's like, why doesn't everybody know this? And then it became intolerable to go to work because it was like we were having the meeting before the meeting so that everybody would say the same thing at the meeting to make sure. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
I don't know. I don't know if you've had that experience. And I just couldn't tolerate it anymore. I'm like, why don't we just go to the meeting and just say what we think at the meeting? Like, what would that be like? And at that point, it started to become harder and harder to be in corporate. So eventually, I started thinking about at that point, could I just do this coaching thing for a job? But I was terrified because one of my beliefs is I have to be smart to get love. Came from when I was little with my dad. And it just seemed really not smart to leave your chemical engineering job to become a life coach. So I was
and I imagine
stuck for a
if
while.
you grew up with financial insecurity, it doesn't help that your worldview was get the best job you can that pays the most to get the job that pays zero and has to be built from scratch.
Exactly. Yeah. So I thought about it a long time. I read so many books on what to do with your life, what color is your parachute, and, all the different like career paths by personality type. And they didn't help at all because I was reading everything through the filter of I have to be smart to get love. And all of the things were kind of pointing to this general line of work that I'm in now, but I couldn't see it. Like I just couldn't receive it in any way. And then my stepdad died suddenly, and he had just gotten promoted into the job that he loved, and he was diagnosed with cancer, and he died within 3 months. At the same time, I was going through divorce, and it was like everything fell apart. And it was the worst and the best because it's interesting because I'm really doing some work currently in my my present life around connecting with my stepdad and the way he's inspired my career. So that part makes me very emotional. Like I feel him around a lot, and that masculine presence. And it was like watching that he finally was doing the work he loved, and then it was over. Just something in me went like, I can do this. And I had failed at being married. And so I knew I could fail and not die. So that was really freeing. And then, just that motivation. And there was a moment where I was with him at the hospital and my boss wanted me to come back to work. And she didn't want to fill out the paperwork for my family medical leave. And so I came back to work. She's just like, just come show your face and then you can leave again. And while I was doing that, he passed. And so there was like this real fuel to be able to work where I want, when I want, and not sit in a cubicle. There was something in the way that she handled it, right? She was like, we trust you, but we don't trust everybody. So therefore, I need you to come back.
I'm sorry. That is
Yeah.
That is a harrowing story. Having gone through some significant personal loss myself, I can't quite imagine the robbery. It would take me a lot of processing to get past the anger that I think I would have. Well, it would have been my last day because I would have exploded in that place like a nuclear bomb. That I'm really grateful that the way you made it out of that was to start the business that you did, because that could have gone in a whole lot of different directions.
Yeah. I don't think I was in touch with my anger enough to be, physically angry at the time. I felt so guilty. And, if I look at how my family is, and part of why I do this work and, why I've had such a light bulb at that training is we didn't tell the truth. Like that wasn't the culture in our family, right? So what I would have loved, my authentic self would have been to be there with him, asking him, what's your advice? Like, oh, what's your favorite moment? What don't I know about you? All of those things. And that wouldn't have happened because that would have been too emotionally intense to be with. So in some way, it's like, yeah, that would have been nice, but that wasn't the reality of the situation.
It's interesting. I grew up in a house that was very bipolar. Maybe not literally like a clinical term, but energetically. So you would never really talk about your feelings openly in a way that would cause like true proper vulnerability, because everybody was so emotionally and mentally tormented that to just sit there with those open wounds was like the last thing you wanted to do, because you were just exhausted and constantly in fight or flight. And so it then became like the shadow where, okay, so unexplored, these things just get stuffed down, and then they would come out explosively. Because when that muscle atrophies, it doesn't have that Bruce Lee level of, if you ever watch a master martial artist, they can go full speed punch within a micrometer of your face because they've got total control over their entire body, right? But that takes a lot of practice. You have to be in that space through the ups and the downs to really gain that sort of mastery over that. And we certainly never did. So I can empathize with the notion of not calling out the dragon in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. So much stuffed emotion.
Excuse
me. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and the woman was talking about just like our job is to feel our feelings. And, that just feels so true. And all the work we do with our leaders, it's like there's a place in the transformational process where all our job is to be with the truth and see it and love it. And it transforms itself.
So beautiful.
But mostly we run it. We do everything we can to run away from it.
And it gets handed down like a gift, a poisonous gift
Yes.
from generation to generation.
Right.
Because when we first started raising our kids, I had the impulse to, if they were upset, to make the upset go away, whether it was to distract or to make light of it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I eventually realized what I was doing and got to inspect, like, we were never allowed to have emotions as kids. Why?
Yeah.
Because if I was upset and all of a sudden my parents' hearts are rumbling around and there's got a
Right.
whole bunch of energy stored around that. And so it's like, oh boy, scary feelings come up. Either stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, or
Yes.
again, distract, right? Make light. Everything was stop
Yes.
the authentic emotions from happening immediately.
Yeah.
And it's so poisonous and toxic. You don't even
Yes.
realize. And nobody's doing it to be mean. No one's doing it to be evil. It's this like reflexive thing that just gets baked in generation after generation.
I'm just thinking, and I'm feeling emotional. The last words my stepdad said were, "Don't cry." That was our last exchange.
It's powerful.
And I know he just wanted to be like, "I'm okay, you're okay, it's okay," but like, don't cry.
Yeah.
And I didn't, if I, the me now would have had the wherewithal to say, "This is how I'm feeling. I want you to
This
receive
is how
it,"
much I love you.
and I didn't have that.
I've been through so many waves of trying to allow myself to feel emotion. Because growing up as a male in the 80s, if you showed any modicum of emotion, it was like, what are you, a fag? Right? Like, it was just like immediately like someone was just trying to tear you down to the rafters. And it's like, of course, everyone's a shaken up bottle of champagne ready to pop because we've never let anyone feel anything. And so this is, again, one of the reasons why I started this whole podcast is trying to help people see that it doesn't have to be rocket science to transform your life. It starts with simple things like feeling the feelings that are coming up in your body, right? Like, not a lot of people could just sit there and have the emotions that you did. And you honor me with being able to go through that.
Thank you.
And it's like that's just another little piece, right? You got a little lighter in those 30 seconds, and the rest of your life will be that much lighter because of it. And if we can just do that, every step we take, shedding a little bit more, I think it gives us that space to tap into those magics that we have, right? To be able to feel that intuition, because we as beings, I get the impression, all these emotions that we don't feel, I think they literally get stuck inside of us.
Absolutely.
And if you're full of this toxic sludge, it's like everything in the world is a vibration, right? Everything looks solid. You zoom in enough, it's just vibration, all of it.
Totally.
So if you're carrying all this energy and everything has a frequency, it's a cacophony in there, right? It's like 25,000 symphonies all playing at the same time. How are you supposed to hear and intuit what the next thing is? So to me, it seems like all the work that you're doing is pointed 100% in the right direction. And in order to get there, we've got to do the work of like, okay, one thing at a time, I got to start to take this armor off of my heart.
Totally. Yeah, I think about, when you spoke about being awake at 3 a.m. and having some clarity and some access at that time when you're so tired, you couldn't resist it, right? And that's one way. Meditation, and really getting into the deep state is another way. And it's my belief that the more we do this work I go like this, right? Like, we have a truth, it's over here, and we've hidden it from ourselves because it's too painful to look at. And really, it's somewhere in our body, right? And our body has decided, oh, she can't feel that right now. She can't deal with it. So we'll just hold it right here until until she's available to feel it, right? And it's like, if we don't go back and feel it, because maybe in the moment it really was too intense, and we had
Right.
to survive, not feel it, because so we could run from the lion or whatever. But we have to go back and feel it, or it's just there. And so when it's there and we're trying to pretend like it's not, we're so busy pretending like it's not that we are not able to access, right? If anything would possibly trigger that emotion, create any familiar experience to that experience we still haven't felt, we're not going to hear it.
Right.
So if Source is saying, I remember I had a moment, you talked about financial insecurity. I had a moment where Source said, cash out your retirement account. Because I told you I had gotten divorced, and I had this chunk of debt, which seemed insurmountable to me at the time. It was like, I'm never going to be able to have Starbucks again for the rest of my life. And Source said, cash out your retirement account. And it was like a weird sign from the universe. And I was like, really? And I had been so programmed by my working class parents, like, don't ever pay anything you don't have to. Right. So to cash out your retirement early, you have to pay a 10% penalty. Right. And so for me, in my worldview, it was like, there's no way I can do that. That's off the table. Even though I knew, like, I was going to start a business and I was going to be successful, and I had this plan, and I knew these things. It was like, but you can't do that. So I'm going to work for the next 12 years without going out to eat so I can pay this off. And then I'll start my business. And that was my thought process, because I didn't have any other worldview. And Source said, cash out your retirement. And I don't even know why I'm telling this story, but it was like, I had that thought so many times, and I ruled it out and ruled it out and ruled it out. And finally, it was like so loud and clear. I did it, even though it didn't sound smart. Remember, I have to be smart to get love. And, you definitely can't just give money to the government and all of these things. But I did it. And first of all, immediately I got a new job. Like, someone recruited me in a new job where I made the exact amount of what I had cashed out more as a promotion. The new job was back at my old company. And then they were hiring people to be in this brand that they were going to sell, but they didn't tell us they were going to sell us. And so I got sold, and then I got a severance package. And so I had all of this money. Like, I just had to go there and sit in a cube, and I got sold and I got money. And all of that opened up because I followed the knowing. But all of my programming was, you can't do that. Like, that would be so shameful.
It is amazing the stories we tell ourselves and the binds it puts us in. I'm fervently convinced that, to your point about the truth, right, that's inside of us, there's a North Star for which we are playing this game. I'm calling it the game of life. I'm under the impression that we are part of this sort of infinite, ever-present awareness, and we just plug ourselves into these lives one after another, and we're either doing it for entertainment or we're doing it to learn something, some combination of these things. But I think it's just like a video game where if you don't have constraints, if there aren't challenges to overcome, it's not fun. You don't want to play a game with no rules. You need the rules. Right. And the most interesting of complications that seem woven into this life is that the things that protect us and help us survive, whether it was the generation before or early on in life, end up becoming the things that bind you from reaching that sort of ascension into what you're meant to do. The objective of what, like, the real purpose, the divine reason that we're here. And there's something like cosmically almost laughable about it. That it's like the yin yang of the universe packaged into the game, right?
Yeah.
And I found that myself, like, so many things that I've had to sort of get over and let go of in order to take leaps. Like, I mean, just even doing this kind of thing where it's like, oh, I'm just going to talk about my feelings and just put it out the world, to
Right.
watch me have emotions and talk about my struggles and this, that, and the other thing. And now that I've done it, it's like, oh my gosh, not only do I get the benefits of people who seem to be getting value out of it, but the value I get out of it
Yeah.
from suddenly taking those shackles and putting them on the ground, and the way it just allows me to live my life so much more authentically, right? I'm sure that when you made that choice to cash out of that 401k or whatever it was, not only did you get the money and the utility of doing that, suddenly the number of things you're capable of goes up by an order of magnitude.
Yeah.
Because now your brain teaches itself, oh, I had a limitation, I took it off, and great things happened.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. I've never thought of it like that. Yeah.
So
It's
we've been
like,
talking a lot about magic. Oh, so go ahead.
I'm just thinking, I remember having the choice in front of me and realizing that not taking the money that was mine to pay the debt that was mine. Well, we could say it was his, but it was mine. Um, and holding that debt was like, okay, I'm going to relive this pattern of shame over and over of like, oh, I failed at that thing. And I'm just going to carry it with me. And then it's like, or I could just let it go. And so there was a whole piece of like you talked about your ancestors and the lineage, like carrying the shame was a huge thing in my family. And to just say, oh, I can actually just, there it's gone. Okay. I learned, I grew, I did it. I don't have to punish myself for the next decade about it. I can just move on.
We're great at self-flagellating in this country.
Yeah.
Something about like the puritanical roots, grinding ourselves down as if it somehow makes you more worthy of God's love by just torturing yourself.
Yeah. Right.
So we talked a lot about magic at the highest of levels by just using that word. 2 questions. What the heck is magic?
Yeah.
And what are the 6 types that you train in?
Yeah. So the way that I define magic, so we call it sourced magic. So first we have to talk about, well, what is source, which is that infinite, all knowing place that we come from and go back to and have access to, not religious necessarily. You can call it energy, you can call it God, spirit, the universe, collective consciousness, etc. I'm not attached to that. But my belief is that source is guiding us. And that's what shows up as our intuition, or I like the phrase inner knowing, because intuition somehow feels like, you're going to do a reading or whatever, which are, a lot of our clients do, which is great. But it's like the knowing, the way you know what you know that you know. And so we say your sourced magic is your inner knowing put to work on behalf of transformation. Or it's the way source is guiding you to help create higher consciousness on the planet. So source is always moving to higher consciousness. It's not going to lead you to, it could create pain, right? When we look at this, sometimes there's pain, or we get guided.
Pain is part of the game,
in a way to see the pain. So it's not like all rainbows and butterflies per se, but it's always guiding us to higher consciousness. So that's what I call your magic. It's your inner knowing that's guiding you to higher consciousness, your divine path, your North Star, like you said. And I use this phrase source magic. That's what I decided to call it. But it's really something that came through when I was working with clients. So all of my body of work, I have 2 books people can find on Amazon, and like for transformational leaders specifically, all my body of work has come from teaching things to my clients when they've asked me questions. And I'm like, oh, let me figure out how to teach you that. And one of the things that was happening, and this was during the kind of the first year of COVID, I had a group that I was leading, and we did a retreat that was like a hybrid retreat, but just to give a context of when it was. And I had a group of 12 clients or something. And a few of them came to my house in person, and most of them were on Zoom. And we did, and what I was noticing leading up to the retreat, and this could have been a COVID thing, but it was really noticeable that everyone was asking me permission to know what they know. It was like in all my client calls and all the group calls, it was like, I think I want to do this. What do you think?
Ugh.
This is happening. I think it means this. What do you think? And, obviously as a coach, like I'm asking questions and guiding people. Like it's not unusual that they would want to know what I think, but it was just really marked. Like, what do you think? What do you think? Can I do this? Do you think I can do this? And so I thought, I need a way for people to know that they can trust what they know. Like they already know. And then they're just asking me for permission. And so this framework came through to start to speak about, how do you know? How do you know that what you know is true? So I've called it the Sourced Magics, and we have a little quiz, and there's 6 types. Most people are multi-magical. My belief is when you take the quiz, you're going to receive the result that source most wants you to work with at this time. But we have some that are, I have a teaching about how we have the one that we honed and the one that we hid. And the two of them together, like really are your unique way that you bring your alchemy forward. But so do you want me to go through them?
I love that.
And I kind of I'm curious to type you if you're open to that.
Absolutely.
And I have a suspicion you would have a lot of recognition magic, because you spoke about that experience of like, don't you see this? Isn't it obvious? Don't you know this? And I also am curious if you have the experience of being ahead sometimes, like, oh, I knew that like years ago and now people are just talking about it. Do you ever have that?
Painfully often.
Yeah. So recognition magic, this is again, I give full ownership to our students, like take it, make it your own, make up your own type of magic. Recognition magic is this seeing connections. And so disparate things happening, but you're putting them together in a way that you can see the thread, whether it's an energetic thread or it's all energetic really, but these connections. And so you might like literally make connections between people really easily. You tend to have innovative ideas because you're seeing the past and projecting it to the future really quickly. And that's why a lot of recognition magicians are frustrated, because they're bored with what they're teaching, but now it's the time to teach it, or they're like people aren't buying the thing because they're just ahead of the curve a little bit. There can be, sometimes it's just a knowing, but there can also be a click of recognition or a following of the signs with a recognition magic. I remember I moved to Colorado because I saw mountains. Like everywhere I went, I was living in Ohio, and I saw mountains, like pictures of mountains, and it was like literally like a click, like a camera flash almost, like pay attention to this. And so that can be a recognition magic guide. Like I just know this is for me. Yeah. Does that sound familiar?
The latter part, not as much. The beginning part's 100%.
And I think people can be doing it so quickly they don't even know they're doing it, right? Like,
that could very well be.
That.
So I have an interesting condition called aphantasia. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's only recently been discovered in the last decade or so. I don't have a mind's eye. So when I close my eyes, I see black. If you ask me to picture an orange, like, it is not possible for me to do that. And so I had sort of assumed that my recognition magic was my brain's way of, because I don't take in these snapshots of images and video like other people do, be able to replay these memories. I have absolutely no ability to do that. Instead, it seems to stream in like metadata. Right? So all the like tagged information about what's happening comes in as little pieces. And then because it comes in that way, there's more free association between what's going in. Whereas normally, I
Wow.
say normally, what seems most people do is, okay, I have this image or this video, and then if it's really stark, if there's something either scary or just high emotion in some way, then it will take and tag it with additional things like smells or other information that's related to it, and then that video or image gets stuck with that information, and then that's how you end up with the ability to recall. Whereas it seems like everything that comes into my brain, if it was recognized at all, it comes in with some amount of that. Now, this is a story that I told myself because I just one day somebody diagnosed me with it, and I didn't even realize it. I just assumed no one could see things in their mind,
Right.
and so I just kind of, well, maybe that was part of my recognition magic, was saying, I wonder if I'm extra good at this because of this thing.
That's really interesting. Connecting the metadata.
So like when I
they
go into, so I sell software to very large companies, right? Like the IBM, Cisco's of the world. These are enormous companies, 100,000 people, so many, they're highly matrixed. There's all spending billions of dollars on marketing. And my superpower is to be able to go into a situation, collect an absurd amount of information, and I don't have to think about it at all. At the end of as soon as the information is done landing, a conclusion has been drawn. And I the very first software company I worked at, I had a big challenge because the CFO was the opposite. He wanted we would have a meeting and we would talk about some changes, because I was running the sales team. We'd talk about some changes that had to happen. And I would make my case, and he would say, all right, I need to think about that for a couple of weeks. And I'm like, you need to what? There's no new information that's coming in. All of the information has been conveyed. There's nothing to unearth. It's exhaustive. It's fine if you say no, but what in God's name are you going to be doing for 2 weeks? Because if you gave me the rest of my life, I was never going to come to a different conclusion than the one I had drawn at the end of the last syllable had left his lips. So I had such a hard time relating to what his worldview was like.
Right.
I mean, it was very volatile at times because I just truly had no ability to understand that anyone saw or experienced the world differently than I did.
Wow. Well, people delay for lots of reasons, but I'm also thinking about just being in sales and how many times I've asked, clients or potential clients, okay, tell me, what specifically are you going to think about? And let's find out, like, is there some new information or not? Like, what does that actually look like? So this is fascinating. Okay. So you're making the connections and you just know that Are you familiar with human design?
Vaguely.
Okay.
It's better for me to say no than yes.
Okay. All right. And just plant that seed. Maybe if 3 people ask you about human design in the next week, look it up.
Okay. I'm going to look it up.
Okay. I'm just thinking there's also a channel in human design that's the knowing, or a gate. That's the knowing gate. So, and it's just like, you just know, period. And then there's an aspect of decision making where people really need to feel all of their emotions and go on this emotional wave about it. And it's 30% of people. And 70% have a more direct access to their intuition.
Interesting.
Or not their intuition. I don't think that's the correct thing. To their correct path for them. Yeah.
You know what's been really hard for me?
What?
Because I've been until 3-4 years ago, I had never really done any healing. I'd been in therapy for decades, but I hadn't healed. I was I was logically figuring out, how did I get this way? And how do I put the shovel down so I stopped digging my hole deeper? That was very helpful because I was digging.
Yeah.
I had a backhoe. I was going for it. So I'm not trying to shit on therapy at all. But it did not help me heal. But it did, once I started healing, make it so obvious where everything was that I could start like ransacking the closet. and taking it out and going visiting with my
Mm.
younger self and forgiving others, then eventually myself. What all that toxic sludge in me, I think, did is like an imperfect prism, right? If you've got a prism, light's coming in and it's refracting light in a very specific, pure way. If you have an imperfection in that object, it's going to refract in different ways.
Mm.
And I think I really struggled for most of my life to distinguish between impulse and intuition, because I would be driven to buy something or quit a job or what have you. And it would be very easy, because I am so confident when I do come to these conclusions. So I might have 1% of the data, but I'm still very confident. And I'm extremely, this is not me humble bragging. This is just true. I'm very rarely proven wrong when I've jumped off that cliff.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm perfect, but like extremely rare. However, that is not the same as, oh, I'm trying to satiate some need to feel safe or important or something else, right? So instinct is when you're getting this divine guidance from source. Impulse is you are so jumping out of your skin. You are leaping forward impulsively to make decisions, to claw at things. And again, if you're not still enough to delineate between the two, they may very well seem the same to you.
To alleviate pain or discomfort or having to feel a feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah, when you said that, it's like the impulse, like I can really think things through. I can strategize. I can come up with elaborate plans and, all the things. And I've learned that that's a way that I feel like I'm in control, but it's not always guided, right? It's just like, okay, I can go do this thing for this time. And then it helps me avoid feeling the feeling of uncertainty in the moment that I have to feel before I can be receptive to something new that doesn't fit my mold. So yeah, I like that impulse.
It's almost like the only thing I have to do is ask that question. Is this an impulse or is this intuition? And the mere act of asking the question answers it. Because now
That's
I'm in
your
a place
recognition.
where I'll know, like, oh, I'm just distracting myself, or I'm just depressed or anxious or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it's the matter of just like grabbing the steering wheel and being like, all right, close the Amazon window. You don't need to be doing that right now.
I love it. So the impulse goes toward buying something that's like for a project or something.
It could be
that
for
feels
anything.
like it's going to make you feel better.
I mean, it's so much better now. It's so under control. There was a point where I had in unsecured debt, meaning not a house, not a car, just credit cards or personal loans. I had almost $250,000 unsecured debt, which is a momentous feat. It's, as a non-business
little
owner,
old me with my 35,000 that I had when I was in corporate.
it's
like,
difficult to. It's actually hard. It's actually a skill to be able to convince lenders to give you that much money. And my problem was I had been a mortgage loan officer and a car salesman and a finance and insurance manager. So I knew, how do people look at credit reports? What do you have to do? I could game the whole system, and I did it to a fault. And then my toxic problem was that anytime I felt stressed or anxious, I'd be like, oh, I'll just go buy some. I'll just suddenly start surfing the net, and I'll just find something to, satiate that need. And then all of a sudden, I'm bound hand and foot at the bottom of the ocean with no ability to breathe. And of course, the universe always delivers a way out. So I have managed to have some radically successful years that, helped me
What
put all that
shifted
together.
inside you that had you get committed to changing that?
I ran out of runway, you
Mm.
know.
Like you couldn't game the system anymore?
It had gotten to a point where there was no conceivable job I could have that would make enough money on a basic salary perspective to accommodate what I'd already done, let alone what I would have been kicking into the future.
Mm.
And I went to a bankruptcy attorney, and we went through this whole thing, and he was looking for the source of like, how did
Mm.
you end up here?
Mm.
And we get through the end of this interview where I'm telling him all about all my debts and this, that, and the other thing. And this is actually probably a pretty pivotal point in my life, if I
Mm.
really look at it honestly. And he wasn't the only bankruptcy attorney I'd ever talked to. And he looked at me and he goes, "You just don't know how to say no."
Mm.
And it hit me like a bus,
Mm.
because his job was to try and make me, what you'd think his job was to make me like him and want to give him my money so that
Mhm.
he would put me through bankruptcy and do
Right.
this and this. And instead, he gave me some tough love. And what was more interesting about it was he was younger than me.
Mm.
And so I've got this guy who ostensibly, and he, at the time I was all about like appearances. And so I was driving a, $90,000 car and wearing fancy clothes and all this kind of stuff, and I come into his ramshackle, little place on the outskirts of town and whatever. He could have been massively wealthy. He just didn't care about any of that. But I'm interpreting him as like, who's this bum telling me,
Mhm.
younger than me, whatever. So the whole thing was a perfect setup for me to completely rethink,
Wow.
what am I doing? And so that was a very interesting pivotal moment. But all of that wouldn't have mattered if I didn't ultimately have my spiritual breakthrough, which came years later. And that was completely by happenstance. I think my vault, my storage unit of my body just ran out of space.
Mm.
There was no more space. And I was, at the edge of divorce with my wife for all intents and
Mm.
purposes.
Yeah.
And I was constantly embattled at work. I was constantly just on edge, triggered all over the place. And I was burning the candle at both ends between trying to work out and this, that, and the other thing. And I have two children. They're now 6 and 9. And at the time, they were very young and they were rambunctiously playing a lot, especially upstairs.
Mm.
And every time that they would make a lot of noise, I would be compelled to sprint upstairs and make it stop at all costs.
Mm.
And it was usually yelling is really what it
Mhm.
was. And I was sitting on the couch one night and I had started using medical marijuana at the time to just try and like stay sane.
Chill out.
And I quit drinking, thank God, for a variety of reasons, health, money, etc.
Mm.
I was talking to my wife and we were discussing like, why does this happen? Like, what is going on? They're just kids being kids. Like, they're not doing anything destructive. And she said, was there ever a time where you were downstairs and something was going on upstairs? And
Mm.
I became paralyzed. And this energy vortex exploded out of me. And I was
Mm.
sitting there and I was rocking like this. And I couldn't talk. And I was just crying. And it lasted the better part of a minute.
Mm.
And I said, when I was done, when I was young, my brothers, I have 3 younger brothers, they'd be playing upstairs and they'd just 3 boys, they'd be doing 3 boy things. Someone would break something or someone would start crying and my dad's bedroom door would explode open or the front door would explode open. There would be stomping, there would be hitting, and there'd be crying. And so I was sprinting upstairs to prevent, and by the way, my dad died in 2011.
Mm.
I was sprinting upstairs to prevent my children from getting beaten by a person who's dead.
Mm.
That energetic release and that understanding of the connection between what happened to me and how I react to things now in an energy way, it unlocked a million doors for me.
When you said it, I felt all of this energy going up my arms and the front of my body. Just,
Mm.
yeah.
It's powerful when that happens. I think there's a shared experience amongst all of us where, like, same kind of thing, like when you tell stories, I can feel it in my body too.
That sensation magic.
Ah, all right. Number 2, sensation magic.
Yes. So sensation magic is really feeling the energy in your body. And, we can have this for ourselves, but this is why I have a leadership program and I train coaches, because we can see it so much better for other people than ourselves. And so you can hone your magic working with clients. And then it's like, wait, I could use that for myself. Wait, source is guiding me? What? Because it's easier to see with other people.
If I took a tenth of the advice I give other people, I'd be Jesus Christ.
Right. So sensation, is also picking up what the client is feeling or what someone else is feeling in their body. And if we have a lot of sensation magic, this is the closest to being an empath, but it's like really physically feeling, not just the emotion, but maybe, let's say, all our body parts correspond to different emotions or energies or whatever, right? Like the liver is resentment, for example. So you might be talking with someone and you get a pain in your side and it's like, oh, resentment. Okay, what's that about? I didn't know I had this. And so recognition was the main one that I learned. And by the way, growing up in a household with volatile people, like my dad was an alcoholic and my stepdad was an alcoholic until my sister was born. And so the volatility in the environment helps hone recognition magic, right? It's like, ooh, I got to pay attention to the mood here. I'm like picking up all of these signals.
Yep.
So I can stay safe and keep everybody else safe, and it sounds like maybe keep your brother safe also, or like feeling like wishing you could,
right,
if you were older. And so anyway, I knew I didn't call it that, right? But I knew I could make connections. I knew that was something I was good at. This sensation thing, I had no idea. And I was leading retreats and I would start to get weird physical symptoms during the retreat. Like all of a sudden I have a stomach ache. And one day, I don't know where it came from, I decided to ask, does anybody have a stomach ache? And someone raised their hand and they were like on the edge of their seat and they really wanted to ask a question, but they were scared and they were all in knots. And so I started to become aware that this was a thing for me. And what I've learned is, there's probably 20% of my clients have a lot of sensation magic. Like they know in their body which direction to go. Kind of like if you said you can ask, is this impulse or not? Like if they just ask, what do I feel in my body? They know. But they never ask themselves that. Like a lot of us just don't use the tool, right? But with clients, to be able to say, I now do sessions with all my private clients where I have them lay down and I scan their energy field and my body tells me what we have to transform for them to hit their next goal. It's like, oh, their creativity is totally shut down and it's because they have such a huge heart and it's been broken so many times. And it's like, okay, that's what we're working on this quarter. And so that's sensation magic. And it's really important if someone has it to just learn how to check in and say, is this mine or someone else's? Because if you're picking up other people's stuff, you might start treating symptoms that aren't yours or, go in a direction and it's like, actually, that belongs to your partner or your mom or whatever. So
that's really interesting. I think there's a lot of potential science to answer why that happens, right? Because if everything is vibration, then that means everything happening in us has a frequency. And if you've ever seen tuning forks, if they're tuned to the same frequency, you strike one, hold it up, the other one starts vibrating. No, it doesn't have to be anywhere near it.
Yeah.
And if you believe in the chakra system, which I do, having experienced some of this stuff myself, and they all have a frequency, if somebody's is vibrating in a certain way, I can totally understand how if you were deeply attuned and influenceable, right, from other people, that suddenly you could start vibrating that way, and
Totally.
you could easily become confused into thinking, oh, this is me and my action to take.
Right. Like magic.
So that's two.
And then it's like, you might walk into a space and you feel a certain type of way and you just know something, whatever's been in the space when you walk in, through your body, through what you feel, or what someone's experiencing, and they may or may not. So, yeah, and learning to trust that. Huge. There's compassion magic. So
Ooh, I was not
compassion
expecting that one.
magic.
Okay.
This is a deep ability. Well, first of all, it's following your heart. So, that's a huge piece of it. But compassion magic is really a gift of non-judgment. So compassion magic helps people to heal without doing anything, really. It's a presence, it's an energy, it's a space of non-judgment. And, we work with transformational leaders, and a lot of times, people can feel like they have to do things to be valuable, to make money, to make a difference. And compassion is like undoing. And it's really holding, it's being with someone when they're being with the emotion that they haven't been able to be with. So that's your compassion magician, is like, we're going to do this together. And, a lot of times it's combined with one of the other magics. But when someone has this, what I find, and especially I work with a lot of women, right? And, I had gotten the feedback of, your soft skills are great, but they'll only get you so far. So, compassion magic feels like the softest skill. And when people get that in the quiz and it comes up over and over, they get mad. Like the women that I work with who have been conditioned to be masculine, and like, this is a soft skill and it's weak and it's like the worst one to get. And they just get really mad. And, but it's like the strongest, really, because to be able to hold that space, you have to be like a boundary ninja. Because if you're just letting in all these toxic energies and you're holding like, you're going to be drained, you're going to be confused, because there's so many energies on the planet that are legit wanting to manipulate you to feel some type of way for them so that you adjust your behavior. And like a true compassion magician is just fierce.
I think it's the difference between being a conduit and being a receptacle. I went on a psilocybin and heroic edible journey at one point. I went off to a hotel and just said, okay, I'm gonna journal, I'm gonna go really deep. And one of the things that sort of came to me, because man, you want to talk about downloads when you're on these plant medicines, you just get, it's like somebody
jammed. I don't know what heroic is. So what heroic edible? What's that?
THC, so cannabis. So
okay.
If somebody were to be just having like a normal human being on a normal Friday, Saturday night was just going to take some edibles and have a fun time, they might take, let's say, 20 milligrams.
Okay.
If you didn't have a high tolerance or a low tolerance, like that would be sort of a middle of the road. I did 270 that night, plus the mushrooms, plus I was vaporizing. So I was trying to see something. Well, good news was I did. Actually, that was
you lived to tell about it.
That was the night before I started this whole project, actually.
Oh, wow.
I could go into a whole bunch of details about the other things that came to me, but one of the things that came to me really clearly is that our work as I don't want to use the word healer, but I don't know. I'm just going to use it as a placeholder.
It's facilitator.
Everybody
of
heals
healing.
themselves. You're a facilitator.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. As a facilitator, the number one thing you have to do is empty yourself so that when someone else is raising their vibration to feel something, you can momentarily take on that vibration in your body so that it doesn't overwhelm them. And the more you've cleared out, the more you can hold, the more capacity you have. And I don't mean hold like literally hold, because I had made that example between the conduit and the container. You never want to hold it or you're going to be in deep shit.
Yeah.
Because your cup already runneth over. But it's like a cable, like the high tension wires, very different than the plug you put in your wall, right? So it's like the more you clear out of yourself, the more you can handle in transmission. And that, where does that come from, right? Like when you have those kinds of downloads, it's really difficult to not consider it some sort of divine intuition that gets installed into you, because like where did I come up with that? I'd never talked to anybody about that. I'd never watched anything, read anything. So it's experiences like that that really drove me to believe that this notion of the source and what people in Hinduism would call the Akashic records, right? The notion that all information is everywhere inside of what the Catholics would call, or Christians would call, Holy Spirit, right? That there's this all-encompassing field that has all the answers to everything that's ever happened and ever will happen. And if you attune yourself properly, which I think can just mean being still enough and quiet enough, you can answer any question if you pay close enough attention.
Yeah, if it's not conflicting with a belief that you have that would have you reject it.
Well, that's part of the clearing out, right?
Yeah. So conduit, tell me again, conduit versus container in your distinction.
So container, so imagine a pipe. A pipe only holds, it's like a transfer mechanism. It's like, I'm next to you. I'm going to allow your energy to pour through me so that you feel safe enough to experience what you need to experience. And the wider that pipe, the more it can contain, the safer you're going to feel, the more you can sort of expose and offload. As opposed to if I'm a drum, a barrel, a cup, I'm taking it in and I'm filling up myself. And you see a lot of people, in fact, Gabor Mate had this happen to him. Are you familiar with him and his work?
Yeah.
So he was down at an ayahuasca retreat in South America as a facilitator. And they asked him to leave because they said, there's so much darkness in you. It's disrupting the field of everybody else. And the conclusion that they came to with him, he went off and did his own ceremonies by himself for a few nights, was that he had been treating people for decades and he was allowing it to slough off into his barrel and just coming up and up and up and up and up. And so he had to process out all of that. He wasn't being that conduit. He became, even if it wasn't entirely a container, he became that container for parts of it. And then over enough time, it makes you sick. In the same way that holding on to your own trauma makes you sick.
It's really interesting. So we use the phrase container a lot in terms of designing a program where you're holding clients in the container, right? Over time. So for example, if we have someone come and work with us for 6 months and they have these certain touch points during the 6 months, we have a retreat and we have, these group calls or whatever, but in between, they're still in the container. And so they're being held energetically by us and our structures that we've created, and in a real practical term is when they're not there, they're thinking like, oh, I'm going to, my next call is in 2 weeks. And like, I'm thinking about, am I aligning with the goals that I've set for this container or am I not? Right. So there's like an accountability, just knowing that you have
Yep.
this container. And I think of it as out here, right? Versus in here.
Right.
But there are times where I've hosted retreats and I'm really clear, like, ooh, I was holding all of that in my body and learning how to keep it out of the body. And so if someone's a sensation magician, and even compassion, right? Like how you can feel without it being filling you up. Yeah.
I feel like I had
that.
0.0% compassion magician prior to the spiritual awakening. And I feel like it's the part that's growing the most and the fastest.
That's
Because I
beautiful.
I moonlight doing some life coaching stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, it comes down to two things. Anybody who goes to therapy or finds a coach or anything like that is doing it for one of two reasons. Either you're doing something that you don't want to be doing, and no matter how much you try, you can't stop.
Yeah.
Or you want to do something, and no matter how much you try, you can't do it. And at the ultimate root of that, every single time, 100% of the time, I would love for somebody to prove me wrong, is something that happened to you when you were young that created some sort of energetic pattern of fear and avoidance. And there's just layers upon layers upon layers of behaviors and traumas that have accrued. And it always comes down to, you got to feel that stuff to get it out of you. There's only one way out, and it's the way it went in.
Yeah. And the more we do, the more we can be a conduit for other people. Because we're not so filled up with our stuff.
100%.
Yeah. Love it. Let me see. Where are we?
So we're down 3
more. So expression magic. This is being a channel for source.
Ooh, like a medium?
Can be. Well, so a medium is specifically for people who have crossed over, is my understanding of it. Where it could be just like a message for someone direct from divine, right? It could be for someone. It could be for a collective.
Like a translator?
Like Esther Hicks.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I guess we could say she's channeling Abraham, I guess. Anyway, like people who are mediums tend to be like, I've had a medium, connect with my stepdad on my behalf, for example, which feels a little different than just we don't know where. I don't always know where stuff is coming from. Some people have a direct relationship with an entity.
Like
and
Bashar,
some people it's just work? Like coming through. Yeah. Right. So it's basically, the words aren't going through your brain. They're just coming out of your mouth. Like you might find yourself being, I don't even know why I'm saying this, but obviously someone needs to hear this. And so expression magic can come through in art and music and dance, movement, all kinds of ways, not just words. So if you ever watch a performer dance, right, and it's like the vibration of the experience is healing. In our world, where coaches are marketing themselves, for example, and they have a lot of expression magic, our traditional structures can be really challenging, like writing the outline of your speech or doing a webinar that's like already pre-planned and structured. It's like, for an expression magician, there's no place for source there. And like, what's the point of even doing it? Right. Or it's like really, really painful to decide what you're going to say because you're not going to say it anyway. So I work a lot with that. Like, first of all, trusting that source is only going to say things that are aligned for you. And so, because there's like a nervousness of what if nothing happens?
Right.
What if I don't know what to say? And it's just the furthest from our traditional way of teaching people how to do business.
Yeah.
Like I'm just going to show up and be a conduit for source and we'll see what happens. But people can feel the energetic of that and they want more of it. Right? But it's just not like a traditional marketing approach.
It's a little like Reiki. There's a little leap of faith involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Reiki, I would call vibration magic.
Oh, is that another one?
Uh-huh.
Nice.
Yeah. So anyway, expression. I'm personally working with my expression magic right now. So I've kind of like made my way around the different ones. And so this year I'm hosting events, and also I told you I'm building a podcast
Mhm.
studio. So I'm kind of creating this platform. I had a podcast for my Retreat and Grow Rich business, but
Oh,
it was much more teaching, right? So I don't know
okay.
what this is going to be exactly. Um, yeah, so it that's my edge right now, is just like, okay, I know I've cleaned my vessel enough that I can trust what's going to come through, and let's see what happens. So that's the game I'm playing this year.
Nice.
Vibration magic is it's interesting because all of these are energy, right? But vibration is like just reading the energy of a situation really quickly and easily. So a sensation vibration might read it through their body. An expression vibration might know what word to say to change the state in a room,
Oh,
right? Like they might be able to speak to change the state in the room. Vibration is, and vibration recognition is going to pick up like the tenor of the words you're using, right?
ooh.
Like, ooh, I don't know, it's just got a heavy energy. Whatever you're saying has a heavy energy, right? Um, and they also can see, this is my experience of high vibration magicians, is they're seeing the soul's vibration of another person.
Hmm.
And so, you know, the practice for a vibration magician is to get like, I can see your purest expression as a soul, and I can also look at your human and see the things you're doing and, or whatever you're communicating, and see both of those and kind of decide, how do I want to play here?
Interesting.
Um, because a vibration magician can tend to give the benefit of the doubt and overlook the shadow qualities, because it's like, oh, I see your vibration, here, but it's like, yeah, but your human is acting like an asshole. And so, kind of being real about that. Like that it's a gift to see the highest vibration of someone, and to get realistic about, and here's where they are. And are they committed to shifting? Do I want to be a part of that transformation? Some of those conversations.
I feel like a part of my hypervigilance growing up
Mm.
was a little bit of this vibration magic. Like when someone walks in a room, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I can read the energy immediately.
Mm.
I don't know that it's at a point where it's delineated between higher and lower self,
Mm-hmm.
but well, I guess the higher self is always kind of in a higher vibrational divine state. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's just stuck in the lower part. Um,
It'd be
yeah,
interesting to kind of bring some consciousness to it and go, okay, am I seeing a conflict between who their soul wants to be and how they're presenting?
yeah, that's an interesting point. It definitely caused some strife in my marriage over the years because I was very bad at being able to pick up on, let's say, my wife's coming in with a challenged vibration.
Mm-hmm.
And because of how I grew up, that's immediately triggering for me. The reason I'm
Mm-hmm.
picking up on it is
Mm-hmm.
that, like a tuning fork, I'm sensing danger.
Yeah.
And did I have the most elegant way of communicating that, honey, are you okay? Anything I can do? It seems like you might be a little anxious. Instead, it comes out as, is there an emergency I don't know about? We're all growing, right? We're all doing our part.
It's interesting. I'm in a relationship now, and my partner um, has a fabulous ability to express anger, which wasn't, I told you earlier, like anger was something I had to consciously work on. Like, oh
Right.
yeah, that's what anger. Oh yeah, I am pissed about this. Um, and so I relate to that, where, it took some adjusting of like, okay, what is this? What is this energy coming in right now? And what I've noticed though is he can feel it and express it, and it's gone. And then it's just like,
Mhm.
hey. And whereas for me, it's like growing up how I did, I never saw that happen. It was just like, oh, we're going to be angry and shit's going to go down. versus just feeling it and then it's gone. So
It's such
I've
a
been learning.
super poignant example. So early in my marriage, we would get into, or maybe it was even the relationship, I don't even know if we were married yet. We'd get into these extremely volatile wars about something.
Mm.
Insert something that wasn't probably that big a deal, but it felt like the end of the world for both of us at the time. And it'd be 1:30 in the morning, and we'd be lying next to each other in bed, and there would become this like stalemate, right? We've expressed ourselves to the extent that it was going to happen, and we just are not,
Yeah.
we're agreeing to disagree, even though we're not as mature enough as to say those words at the time. I'd fall asleep. She would lose her mind because she had no ability to fathom that I had let all the anger and all the frustration, everything through me. I had just emoted it all. And she's sitting there like bubbling up, ready to throttle me. And again, it's to the point of like, it's so hard for us to understand the lived experience of somebody else. And it's a great example of how like you can have these two totally different ways of either expressing or bottling up emotions. Now, the downside to constantly expressing everything you feel is that not everybody is ready to receive that energy
In our
with
world,
grace.
especially.
Right? I've gotten into many a challenge at work because of this, by the way, if you can even imagine that. So anyway, it's very relatable to me, what you're describing.
Love it. I'm thinking of something you said earlier about work that I want to come back to, but I want to do the last one, which is expansion. And expansion magicians, this is not one I had naturally. I paid a lot of money to be in the energy of people with expansion magic, so I could learn how to see more possible. So expansion magic is an ability to, first of all, really know the universe is abundant and anything is possible. And it's like a natural expression. And so, you're talking to an expansion magician if you tell them your idea and they give you like 10 ways to 10x it. And it's just like that. So an expansion magician can really see the bigger picture of what's possible for you because they're not bringing in that limitation of lack.
I almost feel like I may have had that to a fault in my younger years. Because
I thought of it when you were talking about the debt, right? Because debt can sometimes just mean like,
that's
I
the
want
thing
more.
is I was just like, I made 100,000 last year. I'll just make 150,000 this year. I made 150,000, just make 200,000 next year. And it was just like, whatever, like I'll figure it out. And I always figured it out. And so it was just like, okay, so I guess all I have to do is just say I'm going to do it. And then I'll go find a way to do it. I don't need a plan. But again, if you're doing it with impulse and not intuition, or you're not pointed in a divine direction, right? Now what I do, everything that I do ultimately, if it's not pointed towards healing myself, is trying to be of service. And I didn't give a single shit about anybody but myself for at least 30 years because I didn't have the space to, because I was still just trying to survive. Every moment was just desperately trying to feel loved or important or seen, safe, any of those things. So everything that I did was hyper narcissistic because I needed to fill this empty cup with a hole in the bottom. And no matter what I poured in, it was always just going right through. So I think I did have that magic, but it wasn't, there was no backstop to it. It couldn't collect anywhere because it was just running through because there was nothing, it wasn't pointed in a direction that was for others.
When you're working with your coaching clients now, do you find they tend to bring financial goals to you?
I have one client who was worried about money. I would say that's not a common factor.
Or maybe a different way to phrase it, because we're so moving past the financial goal as the measure. Like big visions. Like, this is a big vision that I'd like to create.
No, I'm actually,
No?
and it might just be what I'm
Interesting.
attracting to me at this point in my development.
Mhm.
I'm getting more folks who are trying to figure out, how do I exist in a state where I'm not hyper anxious, or where I'm not self-sabotaging,
Mhm.
right? So it's more like triage than building towards a fantastical outcome.
Yeah.
It's almost like they haven't been able to give themselves permission to have a vision because they don't believe enough in themselves.
Okay.
They haven't been able to tap enough into their source.
Mhm. I feel curious. I don't know what the expression would be, but your training ground with expansion magic of buying things and accruing debt feels like it could come back around at some point as a gift for people. Like, oh yeah, but it's possible. It's possible you got out of that debt.
Well, I will say that when they raise problems, it's easy for me to say, I hear you, and I totally appreciate why you feel like this is a catastrophic situation. Let me tell you what my situation
Yeah.
was. I had a 413 credit score at one point in my life. I owed every single person I knew money. Now, these are not concurrent times, by the way, when I had 250,000 in debt. That became later. But like, there was periods of my life, I was so bottom of the barrel in the hole that, like, other than being in jail, like, I don't know, and I've been arrested, so it's not like I haven't had flirted with the edge of that. And I think part of that was building me to become a believable person in this space. It's like, hey, I've been there, I've been in it, I've been through it. Because, somebody who may have come from a silver spoon type of background and is suddenly going to coach people through, deep trauma healing, I think it'd be hard. I can tell you, I would have a hard time relating to that person myself. And honestly, now it looks like it wasn't for nothing. I went through that, and it built me into this. Because, to go back to the conduit example, even when I was full of sludge, my pipe was growing because I was getting in more and more insane situations, whether it was in good ways, where I'm sitting in front of a chief information officer, executive officer, marketing officer, whatever, at these either government agencies or multi-deca-billion-dollar companies, right? And I'm just way out there. I'm a child speaking to these grown-ups, telling them what to do, and they're listening to me because I am using my magic, right? So between that, or on the other end, putting myself in ridiculous situations like $250,000 in unsecured debt, my capacity for things was growing and growing and growing. But inside of that was filling with more and more and more sludge. But when you clear out the sludge, the pipe is still bigger.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. And so it's like, I have been built now, not just to be able to hold space, but to hold way more space than somebody who hadn't been through those things. At least that's how I like to look at it.
Yeah. And, the thing that's standing out to me is you were in action. And so many people are so afraid to make a mistake that they're just not even in action. So they're not increasing their capacity because the sludge makes it like, oh, I can't afford more sludge. Right. So I like that analogy of like, but yeah, you can actually make room for more. And then there's some space to start healing it. And I don't know, this is coming through as like, we talk about this, as long as you are willing to go through the temporary embarrassment of whatever this is going to be, like whatever you're going to learn about yourself, you'll be fine. You can't not expand and grow. So like, your kids fighting upstairs and that activating that in you, we call it a sourced experience. It's actually source bringing you the exact pattern so you can see it and work with
Right.
it and heal it, right? And it's going to keep happening. And if
And
we,
I think the kids we have and the partners we choose bring us
yes,
right there like a laser beam.
yes,
It's God's
yeah,
greatest gift, is the ability to undo all the stuff that got created one interaction at a time. But you can do one of two things. You can make it worse. It can either be a multiplying effect or a canceling effect.
totally.
And it's just, what mindset
Yes.
did you show up with to experience it?
Yeah. We could have a whole other conversation about relationship. That's been my big training ground. So
Maybe we can
attracting
do
the
a part 2
partners to
sometime.
heal the things. Yes.
I'd love to go into that.
Yes. I married a man and then I married a woman. I thought that would be better. It was like the worst heartbreak and betrayal I've ever experienced,
Oh,
and a lot of amazingness. Like just so much. Yeah, so I'm still in the game of love and I'm enjoying it. I feel like every time I'm a better person. So
that's awesome.
yeah.
So what's number 6? I think we're on the last one.
Oh, expansion was number 6.
Oh, expansion
I
was
think
number
that was
6.
it. Yeah. Yep. So we have recognition, compassion, vibration, expression, sensation, expansion.
And did you get
And
this in a recognition download? Like how did these 6 things come to you?
yeah, I would call it recognition/expression. Yeah, I just really wanted clients to be able to trust themselves. And I was like, okay, what are the ways that they tell me? So the recognition piece was looking at the patterns of
So you'd
the
worked with enough
ways.
people to see a pattern.
Yes. And then, I started to outline it and then I prayed like, okay, what am I, is there something I'm missing? What might this be? Yeah. And probably expression came through that way. Yeah, but it's been really helpful and people make up their own, like, I remember one client had aura magic. She just decided to call it that. I would probably call it vibration, but it
Vibration,
spoke
yeah.
to her. Yeah. And it's just permission, and when we look at what's happening in the world and all of the systems that used to be so solid that are more fragmented and uncertain, we need our magic. Like the more we can tune into what we know and the more we can bring it in service of other humans, the better. Like I believe all conflict just comes from wanting something we don't have, and if we want what we want or what we're
And it's
given,
usually
like,
safety or love.
yeah, like if we just know that we're guided and we're connected, then we're not out there trying to control all the resources or the people or to get this to go like this so nobody sees that I have this. Like all of that stuff just falls away and we can just relate and play. Like you
So I
said,
hope
it's a game. Like, let's play.
and play. I had something come up in my Time Hop, which is an app on your phone that you put in your Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, whatever, and it will show you pictures or posts that you made on this day, a year ago, 2 years ago, on and on and on. And it was 3 or 4 years ago. I had posted on Facebook, "What makes you so sure?" And what I meant by it was, this was at the time when I was first waking up, coming out of the quote unquote matrix and seeing like energy, divinity, intuition, what? Like, because I'd never, I grew up in a Catholic household that was like Catholic by operations,
Yeah.
in no way by like spirit and spirituality.
Yes.
And I opted out of that system at 13, and then I was atheist. And then I would have called myself agnostic because I became smart enough to know how ignorant it was to be atheist, meaning like, you don't know. You couldn't possibly know, but I really don't think so. Right? It was like, I'm 99% sure nothing.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I had all these experiences. I'm like, I know nothing. I know nothing. And once you realize that you are but this tiny vessel in this ocean of information,
Mm.
and you're seeing everything through this like fragmentation of a piece of a piece of a piece, right? Like the notion of, okay, we used to think an atom was a solid thing. Then we zoomed in and saw, oh, wait,
Yeah.
there's protons. Oh, wait, there's these neutrinos. Oh, wait, there's these quarks and leptons above. And oh, wait, there's nothing. It's all just vibration. That one thing alone, if that doesn't keep you up at night for weeks, then you haven't understood what you heard. It's like it's saying nothing exists in the way that we believe. And so if something that you were that certain about can be unwound that fundamentally, I feel like you should question everything. And not in a negative way, in a way that's like, hey, maybe those stories that you've been telling yourself your whole life don't have to be so limiting. Maybe magic is real. Maybe there is this perpetual, nonstop source of information that helps you do the exact next best thing, moment to moment, for your entire life.
Yes.
And what if we used to have entire armies of people like this who could do it? And then we went around the world and we murdered them all, and we burned them at the stake. And we created this clinical, sanitized organization that was pointed towards a new God. Why is it no gods above me in the commandments? Is it about Jupiter? Is it about like God? No, it's about I am honoring money or power or fame above all else. I'm not subjugating myself to the collective, to the most divine thing I could do. And as soon as you put something up there that is not the divine, you're pointed in the direction of hell. And your whole life will become corrupted, and you won't see it until it's pervaded your entire being. That's what I think anyway.
Some expression magic right there.
Woo!
Yeah. Yeah. I really felt that when you said, there were entire communities living this way.
We come through, right? The Native Americans, as far as I understand, didn't even have the pronoun I. Like they didn't have the concept of the individual. Everything was part of the collective. And not just the collective of the tribe, the collective of earth, of nature, as one living, breathing organism with which we cooperate.
Yes.
And then all of this modern mentality, which has been magnified in the United States in particular, of the I, right? The me versus the world. And then we separate ourselves from church. We separate ourselves from our family. We separate ourselves from community. Why? Because there's a lot of money in that. Because if you don't feel like enough, you'll spend a whole lot of money trying to become enough. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse.
And then you're speaking to the witches, which are really the lay healers who could resolve these problems, of which I feel in the lineage, and the medical establishment coming in and brainwashing everybody to think that that's the way, and the profit in it, right? All of the founders of the American Medical Society were uneducated about the body. They just decided to create this distinction and then make it mean something.
You know how my dad was born? They chloroformed my grandmother and pulled him out. She wasn't even conscious.
Wow.
Think about how detached that is from...
I got just like so dizzy all of a sudden.
Isn't that insane? Think about source trauma, like initial trauma. That's how you come in. He was also conceived in an unceremonious manner, which I won't even put into public space. And it's like, oh, wow, he was an angry person who never felt loved or safe or enough. It's like, I can't imagine where that started.
When I can feel in your lineage even how you would then keep getting things to try to be here, because I just felt like, so ungrounded when you said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like no energetic connection between mother and son in that moment. no
I've
energy
I've
there.
spent a lot of time in the last 18 months overcoming is the wrong word. Wrestling with a fear of death.
Mm.
And what's interesting is that I believe that I am a shard of source consciousness. I think I'm a shard of whatever this grand thing is. You call it God, you call it the universe, doesn't really matter to me. And that when I pass away, I will awaken from the dream and I will get sucked back up into the oversoul and plunged back in and whatever. So that you would think would be comforting, that would be like, oh, I'm infinite, I'm eternal, I'm all powerful, I'm all whatever. But instead, what it's done is it has created this sort of panic response about this life, and suddenly how diminutive it becomes in that light. And I think that what's happened is so there's this notion when you're raising kids that in order for them to learn how to share, they have to have experienced ownership of an object before they can share it. So if a kid gets a new toy on their birthday and suddenly you say, oh, you have to share it with everyone at the party, like they're incapable of doing that with elegance because they never possessed it.
Interesting.
And so if I think about what you said around this notion of like, I never felt grounded, I never felt safe, like I existed, like I could just be. You know, I lived almost 40 years not being still for an instant. You talk about go and go and go. Until I started this process and I was doing twice a week sensory deprivation floats for an hour for probably a better part of 2 years. That's where I first found actual stillness in my life. And the peace that accompanied that was unfathomable. So I'm just, all this to say, it's circular back to, I think you really hit something with that notion of like how disconnected you can feel from this entire existence.
Yeah.
Because you never had even a semblance of stability from the jump.
That's deep. Yeah. And when you speak about going back to the oversoul, and I think whenever I think about that, I think, man, I want to have as much fun as I can while I'm here in a human body.
Why else are we here?
You know?
I would
But
tell
yeah,
myself when I got into
if
my
you don't
most
feel
spiritual,
ownership of your human body, even crazy, right? Like that your dad experienced that and brought
I
that
would,
in.
at my peak, like panicky moments, I would say, I would go back to my logician. Like, okay, let's go into the masculine logic box. Okay. No one's ever gotten out of life alive. There's nothing I'm going to do to change anything about the structure of this. The rules are the rules. So I have two choices. I can quit the game or I can play to win. And then how do you define winning?
Yeah.
And I came to define winning as finding peace. Because when I'm at peace, I have pure conduit for source truth. When I'm at peace, everything, it doesn't matter what's happening. It doesn't mean everything's great. You can experience severe pain, but when you are at peace, it's like a symphony. It's low notes and high notes. You're just surfing the wave, and it's all beauty. Because the alternative is the cold, dark void of space. And it's really hard for the human mind to comprehend that. Absolute nothing it's impossible to comprehend. Every single thing you've ever experienced, your worst moments, are a gift beyond measure compared to that.
Right.
And that's why we're here, is to experience the whole fabric. And the more we stop trying to push away the parts that are on the low end of that sine wave, the more we can experience the whole gamut, and the whole thing becomes play. How do we get into flow state? We play.
Let's do it.
All right.
Thank you, Matt.
Almost 2 hours.
This has been so fun.
This is amazing. I'm so grateful you agreed to do this.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.
You are one of the most fascinating and well-developed people I've ever had the privilege of speaking with.
Oh, goodness.
So I'm really grateful that people are going to get the opportunity to listen to this, and hopefully, because I do know quite a few folks who are in this space, meaning the coaching space, that they'll lean into your work and get some value out of it. I know that I'm going to, and
nice.
I
we
would
have
like
a quiz they can take.
Oh, perfect.
So right on the website.
And that's on sourcedexperience.com.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I'll link to everything in the show notes. And I'd love to take you up on a part 2 at some point to dive into relationship topics. That would be fun.
Oh, yeah, that's a deep one. Yeah, I've already thought of people that I'd love to connect you with who would enjoy this conversation with you. And it's been really fun.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
I want to reflect, when you said it's been about 3 years since you had your awakening, we'll call it. I can feel that you've been in deep study constantly during that time. So I'm like, damn, 3 years. That's impressive.
I took the jump off the cliff version of this course with my arms pinned to my side. No hang glider, just free fall.
Sounds expansive.
I would come out of my floats and I would grab the owner of the place that I went. It was called Truth Organic Spa. And I would just talk to her for like an hour, downloading everything that had just come to me in these tanks. And it was just, I can only imagine what it must have been like to be her and see this hyper logical masculine person walk into the space, and that crazy transformation over the time. Because I wouldn't have recognized me if I was her. Well, thanks again.
Beautiful.
I can't wait to do this in the future.
Yeah, have a great evening.
Best of luck to you.
Bye,
Cheers.
everyone.